Did you know that non-commissioned officers have the authority to arrest soldiers? And we're talking about junior enlisted all the way up to commissioned officers. All this and more. Let's get to this. So we're talking about some stuff that's going to come from two documents, right? One is AR 600-20, which of course is the Army's command policy, and then we'll reference back into the manual for courts martial. And this kind of stemmed off from a question about the Army command policy, and specifically Chapter 4. So what we're going to do is I'm going to bring up a screenshot here of a few things. We'll kind of go through some of this together. All right, so here we are, and we'll pull this up. It's the beginning of 600-20, Army Command Policy, and we'll just scroll down here as quickly as we can without passing it, because the specific question was about Chapter 4, and we can see here that it's military discipline and conduct, and so we're kind of going to break down Chapter 4, and of course we'll get back into the authority that we have as NCOs, which is pretty awesome. Most people don't even realize that. Did you know that you can apprehend? That means arrest. You can make an arrest. I mean, come on. Doesn't get much better than that. So we see everything that Chapter 4 has in it, and that's all of it right there. So everything from military discipline all the way down to combating trafficking in persons, all is covered under Chapter 4. And so here we find ourselves looking at the intro to Chapter 4, military discipline and conduct. And it begins talking about discipline, which defines or is defined by self-discipline. I always love it when we use words to define a word. For authority, military discipline is the role of effective training. I agree with that. Obedience to orders, right? So all personnel in the Army are required to strictly obey and promptly execute orders that are lawful and legal. Give customs and courtesy. Respect to seniors will be expected and extended at all times, and you would refer back to AR 600-25 for that. And then we go into soldier conduct. Of course, again, all of this is dealing with basic military discipline. So presenting a clean and military appearance, taking appropriate action and consistent with Army regulations. Just keep scrolling down. Maintenance and order. And here we're specifically really talking about the MPs or security forces and what their job and kind of some of the root of their authority. Exercising military authority, going into 4-6, promptly, firmly, courteously, and fairly. And I'm sure that's all debatable on how that actually works out. One of the most effective non-punitive corrective measures is extra training or instruction. And a quick fact about this. So in the 90s, when I was in the Corps, I could use extra military training as a corrective measure. And I'm talking about specifically things like physical aspects, like the push-up. There's absolutely no issues with that. But then, sometime in the late 90s, Dateline came out with a special, and it was about pinning on blood wings. And so Mothers of America kind of went berserk about this because we're literally pinning, and just like we did in the Army, pinning rank in, making dudes walk through the gauntlet to get their blood stripes beat into their legs, and all kinds of other things, which are looked at now as hazing, right? And by definition, one could argue that they are. But besides the point, I could make a Marine push. And then it changed to you could only make a Marine push if you were pushing with them, and then all of a sudden, just all of it out the window. So fast forward to 2014, 2015, somewhere in there, I'm in Iraq at Al Taqaddum as a platoon sergeant, and they sent me there because I was a prior service Marine and old TQ that was run by a Marine Corps detachment there. And I was talking to one of the gunnies, and we were talking about this, and he was explaining to me that they can't do that. I was like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me!" I was like, "Hey, Specialist Taylor, post." And so Specialist Taylor, he comes up to the position of parade rest. I'm like, "Front leaning rest position, hoof." I was like, "You moved a little bit too slowly. We're going to do some corrective training, Taylor." I was like, "In cadence." He's like, "In cadence." I was like, "Exercise." And I'm looking over here at the gunny. 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, 2. And the gunny's losing his mind like, oh my God, I was getting so much trouble for that. And of course, as we know, we can utilize, things of this nature for corrective training and instruction. And I would submit to you the same thing I would submit to anybody is when we do so, it should be anything that we do should be related and deliver results to not allow that deficiency or that non-conforming condition from coming back again. And although I could argue that the push-up can help us with dadgum near everything, it can be a little bit of a stretch. So we'll dig down a little bit further in here. We've got disciplinary powers of the commanding officer. So here we're specifically talking about being able to do investigations and non-judicial punishment and some different admin stuff. Some of this stuff is rather boring and doesn't apply to a lot of people. Right, so then we get down in here to the participation of support in civilian law enforcement agencies, which is a really gray area for a lot of reasons, and there's a lot of good reasons why, because we need to let the civilian populace take care of themselves. And then we have membership campaigns, and here we're really talking the organizations that have close historic ties with the military community and are composed largely of active and retired military personnel. And you're going to see a lot of campaigns that are out there that are directly tied in with the military in some ways, and in some ways it's just a super close relationship. We get it down in here to extremist organizations and activities, and this has been subject of a lot of discussion over the course of the past even just couple years, but it's really been there for a long time. Again, going back to when I was in the Corps in the 90s, I couldn't shave my head bald. I couldn't shave it. I could cut it down to like a number 1 if I wanted to, but I couldn't take a razor to my head because that would have identified me as being at least potentially a part of an extremist organization or being a skinhead. But we do know that participation in extremist activities is inconsistent with the responsibilities of military service. So we must reject participation or advocate any organization that advocates racial, sexual orientation, ethnic hatred or intolerance, any sort of that nasty, crappy stuff. Creating or engaging in discrimination based off of race, color, sex, national origin, religion, and sexual orientation, and using force or the threat of force. These are all obviously no-goes. And then the chapter just continues to go on into all types of extremist stuff and what commands have in their kit bag in order to be able to deal with that. We get down in here to the Army language policy, and of course, English is the operational language of the Army. And this has been one of those questions I've heard in promotion boards and competition boards of, you're in the motor pool and somebody's speaking a different language, what are your actions? And it wasn't that long ago when soldiers and leaders alike would tell us as members of the board that I would tell them to stop speaking that foreign language. Well, if they're just jib-jabbing and having a good time or whatever, it has absolutely no bearing, and they're absolutely authorized to speak, whatever. They could speak Klingon if they wanted to. But when it comes to operational issues, that's when you get into the official language. And then we get into soldiers, relationships between soldiers of different grades. This is an area of the regulation where we've had some recent changes going over the past few years because we used to talk about fraternization and then just improper relationships. Well, with the recent changes, any relationship, any personal relationship between a junior enlisted soldier and any non-commissioned officer, warrant officer, or commissioned officer is technically fraternization. You can do some one-time events like maybe sell a car or things of this nature, but getting and acting in a personal way with our subordinates is something that is absolutely frowned upon. Chapter 4-15, other prohibited relationship, is really going to be discussing more on the trainee and trainer type of relationship, and it will go into a lot more in-depth than that, as well as recruiters and things of this nature. And then you scroll back down a little bit further, you get into the harassment prevention and response program, specifically talking about hazing, bullying, and discriminatory harassment, which is one where we know that we have no tolerance for in the military, especially because we're a values-based organization. And so specifically, we're talking about hazing. Hazing is going to be an act that is inclusive in nature. In other words, I want you to be a part of something, so I'm going to do something to you, or I'm going to make you do something. Going back, again, pinning on blood wings, I want you to be an NCO, or I want you to be airborne, so we're going to pin the blood wings. I want you to be an NCO, we're going to pin on your stripes, I'm going to give you your blood stripes and things of this nature. Whereas bullying is more exclusive in nature. In other words, I want to keep you out of the group. You're out of the circle. It goes further into intimidating, teasing, name-calling, things of this nature. And what I would tell you, whether it's you looking for some guidance for yourself, or if you're looking for some guidance for somebody who's in your charge, stop by your inspector general, who can break down this in a lot more deep, what the heck is a deep, in depth, based off of your specific scenarios. And then we get into online misconduct here. And so we're really talking about, in today's age, how are we using our cell phones, or any other form of electronic communication in order to harass somebody else. And this could be from top to bottom or bottom to top. But I think we see a lot of this on social media, right? Whether we're talking about TikTok or Instagram or any of those other hoo-yahs where we like to go cupcake and lollipop, or just in the way that we text or post things about different people or about different organizations. In the chapter is going to go all the way down and talk about, improper use of funds, GTC card misuse, and everything else. So, when we go back to the original point of NCOs being able to apprehend people, this is what we're talking about: military executing military authority and discipline, right? And so we need to scroll back up into chapter 2 when we start talking about the non-commissioned officer support channel, right? And who we are, and of course its parallels and complements, the chain of command. But if we scroll down here a little bit, oh, look at that, there's a first sergeant. Let's look at him. The position of the first sergeant designates the senior NCO at the company level. The first sergeant of a separate company or equivalent level organization administers the unit non-commissioned officer's professional development program. If we look down at the bottom of this page, right, so NCO disciplinary policies are shown below. NCOs are important to maintaining discipline in the Army. The policies prescribed in this paragraph should be considered together with provisions of Chapter 4 of this regulation, AR 27-10, and the Manual Courts Martial, which we'll look at here in just a second. NCOs have the authority to apprehend persons subject to the UCMJ. Pursuant to the UCMJ, again, we'll pull that up here in just a second. Let's make sure there's nothing down below here that we need. NCOs may be authorized by their commanders to order service members of the commanding officer's command, subject to the authority of that commanding officer, into arrest or confinement. But what we're going to do here, and of course we don't have the authority to impose non-judicial punishment, what we're going to do here is pull up the manual for courts martial. And here we are in Rule 302, Apprehension. And it goes through with a lot of legalese talk about what apprehension is. See if we can make this a little bit bigger. Of course, it's the art of taking somebody into custody. Apprehension is the equivalent of arrest in civilian terminology. And then if we scroll down, so who may apprehend? The following officials may apprehend any person subject to trial by court-martial. So what is any person subject to trial by court-martial? Any uniformed service member, that's what we're talking about here. Any uniformed service member is subject to a trial by court-martial. What offenses are subject to trial by court-martial? There's a key there. So any infractions all the way down at the bottom of the manual for court-martial, any of your punitive articles are subject. So even somebody hits another non-commissioned officer, you have the authority to apprehend them. Insubordinate conduct, you have the authority to apprehend them. Larceny, theft, assault. Now, what's the consequences of it? I mean, that's all subject to who knows. But let's scroll back down here. So commissioned, warrant, petty, and non-commissioned officers, all on active duty and training. Those are the ones who have the authority. The number one was about persons who are performing in a military kind of police perspective. And in number two here, we're talking about basically every NCO. Of course, it does go down in here in the discussion to talk about those NCOs or petty officers not performing law enforcement duties should not apprehend a commissioned officer unless directed to do so by a commissioned officer, or in order to prevent disgrace to the service or the escape of one who has committed a serious offense. All right, so attempted murder, boom, you can step in and do that kind of stuff. So I hope you enjoy the content of this one. As we looked at chapter 4, with our code of conduct kind of stuff, as well as some of the basic authorities that we have as non-commissioned officers. Again, I'm not going to tell you to go out and start, dropping some people's elbows and putting people in headlocks and stuff as you try to apprehend them. There's a lot of stuff going into that. So make sure that you exercise your authority and keeping with embodying the Army values, right? If you do that, you'll never go wrong. Leave some comments down below. We'll continue to keep this conversation rolling. As always, appreciate all you guys, man. And until then, you stay out there, you keep grinding, and you stay stoked.